Priority mail, because it's a package from China. Hey, welcome back to the channel. It's awesome that you're tuning in. So in this video, the King returns, but not the normal King. This is the GT King, the Pro, with some new improvements when it comes to the specifications and the chipset. Nevertheless, it's awesome that you're tuning in, because we're going to do a chit-chatting about this Beelink box. We can do a lot of great things with it. Inside the box we're going to get the power supply, the air remote, but I do like the shell itself because this version comes in a very nice metal, or better said, a heavy metal shell. They lost the interest of the two eyes because they didn't add it to the new box. A little bit of a bummer, but yeah, it's more like a personal opinion. What can I do with this thing when we're going to play some retro games? So at the right side we're having two USB connections for connecting our controllers, so quite interesting. And two is not enough, because on the other side we also going to get another pair. Yep, so in total we're having four for using, and of course an SD card that we can use for the Emuelec. And at the back we're going to find a special left and right channel output, the LAN connection, HDMI, the RS233 connection, input for the power supply, and of course we're having the on and off switch. So the specs of the Pro are slightly better of the normal version. This thing comes with the Aimlogic S922X quad-core CPU plus an hexa-core ARAM G52 MP6 GPU. 4 gigs of RAM, 64 GB of storage, so it's quite interesting. Then we're having the Wi-Fi capabilities, 2.4 GHz and 5.8 GHz, and Android 9.0. If you're not interested in the emulation part, you can also use this thing just like an Android box. You can use the Play Store, we can add apps like this. The interface is exactly the same like a lot of these Beelink products. We have Play Store capabilities, but take consideration that Netflix is supported, but not with the full HD and 4K resolution. I think that is the biggest bummer of this device. So the King itself, or the previous model, also had a very good support for Android games, and the games were really smooth. But the GT King Pro, with this minor tweak, we even have some better performance with some games like the new Asphalt racing games. When it comes to watching in 4K, the Pro is just a king when it comes to this. Nowadays we're having a lot of different boxes, so this is not really special anymore, but it's a really great feature that we don't have with the really cheap boxes that you can find in China. But again, take consideration, Netflix doesn't have a 4K or 1080p support. The benchmarks were, in my opinion, very promising when you're looking at the Nvidia Shield back today. It was getting really close, but it didn't defeat the Nvidia Shield by a long shot. But how is it with the emulation and of course retro gaming on the GT King Pro? Is it really an emulation monster, or is it just outdated? Installing Emuelec is a very great addition to the GT King and the GT King Pro. But take in consideration that you need to have the right format or the right piece of software, because the chipset is slightly different with the King and the Pro. But when you're having it installed, you need to mess around and tinker with the settings. RetroArch need to be configured, and you need to add your games and all of the other stuff. But in general, it looks pretty cool, and it breaks up this device in something completely new that we can say this is just a retro pro monster. We have a lot of great support when it comes to these games, even the old school stuff like Atari, Commodore 64, but when you go to the arcade stuff, Sega Dreamcast, it will all run. Take consideration, it depends on what kind of core you're using, because that can make a big of a difference when it comes to some systems like Sega Dreamcast. But let's get it out of the way, God of War Chains of Olympus will not run on the GT King Pro, or you need to tinker with the settings, and maybe you get it a little bit playable, but in the end it's just a no-go. But when it comes to the old school part, like the arcade, Neo Geo, 8-bit, 16-bit, it will run just fine. I think this is not a reason that you need to buy a Pro. It's just a really cool package when it comes to the Pro with the specs, and you can run a lot of games very decently. But some of these games you can run it on a very basic box. So that is not a reason to buy a Pro version. So it's more like what kind of games do you want to play with your box. If you only want to play the really old school stuff, you can basically buy a normal King or even a cheaper box that will run these games nowadays just as great like the Pro. So with the new specifications of the GT King Pro, we have a way better support when it comes to PSP. But it is just a minor improvement over the original GT King. And not to forget, when you're running PlayStation 1, this will not be a problem, simply because PlayStation 1 was already running on the King itself. And nowadays, some decent boxes that you can get will run PlayStation 1 on native resolution just fine. Even with the minor upgrade when it comes to the specifications, or better said, the chipset, N64 is still running with some games pretty decent, but it has the similar problems that with the Raspberry Pi 4. Some games will run, some games will run not. We have some minor glitches here and there, so it's just a mixed bag when it comes to the N64. So the improvement of the King was not really a big step up when it comes to N64 gaming. But yeah, even with it is flawed in many ways, you can play a lot of great games on the N64. Some with some minor glitching, but you can see the games that I'm showing you didn't glitch a lot. Red Dream is just one of my favorite emulators of my favorite system, the Sega Dreamcast. And even if you're going to buy this one from the App Store for not a lot of money, you can even run it on 1080p and it runs just fine on the GT King Pro. Take consideration that 4K is too much for this box. But Sega Dreamcast is an emulator very hard to get it working perfectly on the GT King or the GT King Pro. But take this in consideration that some of these games will run without any frame skip. So that's pretty interesting. So next up, the old school stuff again, like Neo Geo, Mame will run just fine. But I just want to repeat myself, you're not going to need a GT King Pro for this, because it will run on a cheaper box. Okay, so what do I think of the GT King Pro? So let's talk about it. I think it's a great box even now in 2021. But it is flawed when it comes to emulation of the high-end stuff. PlayStation Portable with the PP SSPP struggles with a lot of games. So for those games you don't need to get yourself a Beelink King the Pro. Sadly, with a lot of other systems like the Sega Saturn and Dolphin, I don't want to start about it. It's just a no-go. It's a quite powerful machine, but maybe in the future or in this year we can see some more boxes that are able to run the games that we can't with the GT King Pro. So maybe if you can pick this up for not a lot of money or in a bargain box, it can be interesting. But if you're going to pay the full price, it's still a very good alternative in my opinion against the Nvidia Shield, because the Nvidia Shield is around maybe twice the price of the GT King Pro. Again, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, hit the bell, become one of the Wicked family, and I will see you in the next video.